It is processing it. I think we're live.
Says so. Yeah, it says so.
So this is new.
Isn't it just?
So what are we doing again?
eSIMs.
So yeah, wireless Wednesdays. They're going to be every Wednesday, I think, at this time, unless we choose to do a different time. And we go over everything to do with the wireless world as we know it at the moment, which includes, but is not limited to, private wireless MVNOs, eSIMs, travel SIMs,
cargo
IoT,
bikes, electric vehicles, tracking.
and we are extending it to sustainability and EVs.
Indeed.
And I think the most important thing is the software-defined vehicle. Let's have a buzzword, which has been a long time coming, but is sort of finally coming to fruition as big vehicle makers like BYD are basically installing an Android head unit, and you can do what you like with it. You're not stuck. But I suppose, shall we start with e-cargo bikes, since we got our first orders of our small electric vehicles, our first electric vehicles. Sounds weird, doesn't it? But our small e-cargo bikes, which are going to have private 5G on them, so networks on wheels, and be going into a council that we'll start showing this and sharing the process with you here on this channel and on LinkedIn. And so yeah, why e-cargo bikes and now, and what have they got to do? Why have they all got trackers in them?
It's probably as well, I think, to give some context as to why we decided to do e-cargo bikes. I mean, the quick headline, 30 seconds, is DSIT, Department of Science Information Technology, has put a lot of money into securing supply for networks, particularly a lot into Open RAN and a lot into sustainability. And what that's meant is they've looked at particular projects with Open RAN and looking at areas of not spots, for want of a better phrase. And the solution we came along with was network on wheels, for want of a better phrase. And there's 3 variants of that. One is Land Rover, the petrol version with a patented mast on there. There's the electric version of Land Rover, and then there's an e-cargo bike, which is for the really hard to reach not spots, as I'd like to call them, because they're pretty durable and they'll go over most things.
Well, they're light as well, so you can actually get them into, I think, we saw this when we took our Land Rover to various events. We had it in the IEC, I think it's called, up in Olympia, and you can drive a 2-ton vehicle into there very easily. But obviously, when we went to places like Amsterdam, there are not many lifts you can get a Land Rover into either physically, but these you can actually get into. There's a version that will go into any lift that that's wheelchair enabled, which should be pretty much any lift in Europe that complies with modern building regulations. And from the weight point of view, it only weighs about 40 kilos without the batteries. Obviously, each battery weighs about another 40 kilos. But what's important for that, and I think no other e-cargo bike does at the moment, and you should be able to maneuver a bike. And this is something people often forget until you've got an e-cargo bike in a situation that you can't maneuver it. But if it weighs 100, 200 kilos and you can't lift it, I mean, this, because it's all terrain, will go up a curb anyway. But if you get yourself to a situation where you're up against a load of stairs going down and you've got the brake on and you don't know what to do, you can actually lift it round, which you can't always do with a lot of vehicles. So it will go, and this is going to be key with the private, we're sort of seeing with the private 5G initiatives, that if you don't get your planning permission in on time, you don't have permission. There's lots of places, even in England, that people are trying to get, for example, lampposts to put private 5G on, but these lampposts already have Wi-Fi, environmental sensors, car charging, etc. They can't always take another 10, 20 kilos. And on top of it, even if they could, a lot of places just don't want you putting another lamppost up. whereas you can take a cargo bike that has a coffee machine, sells flowers, etc. And I'm going to be the coffee machine, not the flower one. But,
I mean, it's been on the news recently here that somebody out in the boondocks, right out in the country, was quoted something like £100,000 from Openreach to provide a fibre service to them. So obviously, if you can get a private 5G network down there and round there to a small hamlet of just 4 or 5 people, it negates that cost immediately. So there are applications all over, and for rural and countryside applications, even if it's for small parties and things like that, they're very, very useful.
That is the key we're seeing, in that you don't need a network all of the time, and especially places like England, for example. A lot of people are obsessed with, if you want to cover a beach in England, there are literally only, well, let's not be horrible, there's more than 3 days a year that you need to put private wireless on a beach in England. It's actually 5 on a good year. But you don't need to be having a huge amount of expensive infrastructure on a beach in England for the 6 months of the year that there's just one bloke with a metal detector. And that vehicle can be somewhere else. For example, assisting with lambing, assisting with people. I saw a tweet the other day where someone said, I don't understand all these vehicles. People who live in civilized countries will probably not understand, but in England, when it snows, which is not very regular, sort of when it happens here, there's a large percentage of the British population who decide to wear nothing but a t-shirt and get into their car with not very much fuel and drive until such point that they cannot drive anymore, and then become a problem for our rescue services to try and rescue. And one of the tweets of an equally amazing member of our public said, I don't understand, if they're stranded, why can we not get food and warm clothes to them? And it's like, well, if we could get food and warm clothes to them, we could get them out of the car that they've got themselves into. But if they've all blocked the road and the access to it, you can't. However, if you have a small e-cargo bike with metal studs on its amazing fat tires, you can actually get both the network connectivity and some food and hot beverages. Hence me being the T-boy with responsibility for hot beverages as of my recent promotion, as you can see there. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting times. And the other thing is, obviously, we talk about electrification, and electric cars are wonderful in many ways. However, and electric vans are wonderful in many ways, but the big part of the problem at the end of the day is that there's still a 2-ton vehicle that is 15 to 20 square meters to move less than a square meter, and 100 kilos of human and cargo. It's a bit silly. We're never going to hit net zero if we're busy trying to move 100 kilo people with 2 tons of vehicle and batteries every 5 minutes. And that's one of the reasons, I suppose, getting into Trackagy, why we started Trackagy was, way back when, these are still the old 3G ones that are coming out now, going into 4G ones, but actually to look at how people really use their vehicles, because we're sold a vehicle that needs to have a 300-mile range. And I personally, from the last 2 years of stats that I've seen, and I live in a dense urban area, but my average journeys are between 1 and 2 miles, and I do less than 10 miles a week. So I should not be worried about charging infrastructure if I get a vehicle with 300-mile range, because I'll need to only charge it probably 3 times a year. I think I'll manage, and it's just ridiculous for me to be. And I think the other thing that I saw is that the average person in England, I think, spends £10,000 on a vehicle, and in America it's even less. I suppose because there's such massive vehicles, you can get them cheap. But the average American, I think, spent something like about less than $10,000 on a vehicle. However, if you try and push the range anxiety cars, the batteries on board not only are heavy and using kilowatts of fuel just to move the batteries that weigh many more times the cargo, but also the cost of those batteries. And then the charging infrastructure becomes a problem as well, right? If you need a 150 kilowatt charger, I'm sure there are villages in England that not only do they not have fiber, but they don't have 150 kilowatts for the whole, well, they probably do now for the whole village, but there was not long ago when the standard connection for a house was 3 kilowatts and 5 kilowatts. So
You've got to think about natural disasters as well, Christian. You can get an e-cargo bike somewhere with a 5G mast. We've had locally, we've had lots of floods and things recently, haven't we? Localized flooding and things like that. It's never happened before. You can get the e-cargo bike with a 5G mast there and provide a service, to either the emergency services or the press or anybody else that needs it. It's a very, very useful application.
One of the councils that are in this next DSIT project that we're doing, I should explain for other people or anyone else can jump in, but we're part of the ORAN, the latest DSIT UK government funding of Open RAN in the UK. The last round of their £250 million sort of big plan spend was about 88 million, and we're one of the recipients of that as part of a consortium with Telet and Worcestershire, Shropshire, Bath, Bristol and Cardiff councils and Lancaster University, etc. And yeah, I mean, Shropshire was quite right to point out that they have a flood every 5 years, and now they probably get 5 a year. And a small light vehicle that can get connectivity there is quite a useful thing. And we can also track. I think the other thing that's massively changed as well, even in the time that we have been developing them, is that the first editions of the vehicle had things like this, a Raspberry Pi based tracking, and maybe another tracker like this, whereas now they're actually going to have, and I don't have one with me on my desk, I do have a lot of crap on my desk, a lot of crap behind me, apologies for, I think there's an electric wheel and parts of a 3D printer and some radios. I will tidy that up for the next one, but you can have, everyone has one of these, and we're seeing the clever cars now getting rid of you having to have other devices like this. But I mean, some of the stunning ones that replicate, you can't deny when you go we like a big screen, right? I mean, one of the most successful technologies in the world has been flat screen TVs because we like a big screen. And when you get into a Tesla and you see that massive 15-inch screen, you go, oh. Then you try and use the software and realize that it doesn't have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, and you go, anyway. But that's another conversation for another time. The modern cars now, the BYDs, etc., have the latest Snapdragon and ARM-based, very, very fast, basically Android computers in there, and they're wonderful because you can even put the Android app to control these things on there, as well as your navigation and 4G, 5G. And the processing power, especially in the ARM ones, is absolutely astonishing. So you can actually I know we talk about edge and computing, etc., but there is actually, I mean, infinitely more power than one of these in the latest Snapdragon Mali ARM processors. So I suppose we should move on quickly, should we, to travel sims?
I think just one final point on the cargo bikes is we're looking at quite rightly, the emergency response and how e-cargo bikes can assist in this way. I think there's an upside as well. A lot of local councils, local business initiatives, and a lot of councils want to drive revenue for these businesses. And one of the things that they do quite often is festivals and local festivals. I mean, everything from Glastonbury down to very, very specialist and niche. Now, Glastonbury is one thing, apart from getting churned up and getting access for any mobile solution. A lot of councils want to drive revenue for these businesses. And I think that they do. Sorry, there's an echo background there. So I think for the local festivals.
Sorry, I opened the LinkedIn page because I'm.
Yeah. So one of the big things for this is generating revenue. And a lot of festivals have had to, especially smaller festivals, have had to say to people, bring cash because they haven't got connectivity for card machines. And you're asking people now that, I mean, I since COVID or even before COVID, I think I've handled cash twice in my life, and that's because somebody's given it to me. I've not been to a cash machine for many years. So having to suddenly, and that just constrains the amount of revenue for the business and the local economy, yada yada yada. So if you get the connectivity, you can bring online via satellite, the payment systems. Immediately you change the dynamic of that whole festival. People can eat and drink and impulse buy and everything else that goes with that. And I think councils recognise that, and I think it's very, very important for them, quite frankly. So I just wanted to mention that before we move on.
No, it's very important. And the councils, 15 years ago, we were working with Nokia and Live Nation to create the festival apps. These were J2ME apps on this was before the iPhone existed and before Android had made everyone go, yeah, right. But the Nokia, Sony Ericssons, etc., were all Java based. We did some Java apps, and the key interests were, for example, the Download Festival up in Derby. Derby is in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere. It's a racetrack, and
Donington Park.
Dry Stone Walls Group 4 security van with a few million in. There was not a year that went by without one of those succumbing to the local entrepreneurs, let's call them, who would decide to rob them. But also the problem was that by the end of the event, nobody, and we was on the call this morning, weren't we, as well? You've got to take a load of cash, and you think, do I have a load of this cash? And who's going to try and mug me in the car park as I get there? But B, it's never enough, right? I mean,
yeah.
If you're in a field with nothing to do but order, if you put a load of British people in a field with fear, they will consume more. I mean, you even put them in an airport and they'll consume more than they're allowed to get on a plane with. So yes, it is. But the community, at the end of the day, it's the community, isn't it, who needs to be able to attract people, and we need to be able to. I think everybody who went during COVID out back into the country and potentially moving away from this terrible hub and spoke situation where London is just getting bigger and bigger and richer, and the rest of the UK and places like France have the same issue where Paris is just getting bigger and bigger. A lot of people during COVID went back and then went, this is ridiculous. There's a dentist convention with 5 people down the road and my network's fallen over. So yes, that is interesting. It brings us on to the sort of second SIMs as well, doesn't it? And travel SIMs and being able to go around the country. When I cycle across Wales, when I have cycled across Wales in a previous version of me that weighs a little less than I do now, when you arrive in Knighton, there was I won't do the accent, but where can I get mobile connectivity? And there's literally T-Mobile at the post office and Vodafone by the pub. But in between and that's not in the Welsh desert where there's only 5 Army Land Rovers. So having a SIM or a second SIM that is connected to any network is definitely something that people want. And there's like a circular thing as well, because I've noticed that a lot of these devices, so obviously there's the big IoT, that's SMSR, but a huge amount of IoT devices are consumer SIMs. And we probably don't have time for this one on this event, but there was a certain MVNO based from a supermarket that was wondering why they were getting strange calls to their call center. It's because they gave, I can't remember if it was 10 or 100 megabytes free of data to try and get people to use data when data wasn't a thing. And millions of people had worked out that you can stick those in your tracker and it will use under the 100 megabytes of data, but every so often you have to make a call to keep the SIM alive. And but that is not really a reliable way to put them in. But if you do have another little app, and you've got a SIM for tracking all the different things that you want to track, that is a good thing. So
along with the tracking, the multi-IMSI SIM, the eSIM allows you to, certainly in the UK, access to every network, particularly if you're off grid, if you're mountain climbing or whatever it might be. The ability to pick up any network is absolutely key. From not only your own personal safety perspective, but from communication with any of the emergency services should you have an accident or anything.
especially as now the latest, I haven't tried this yet actually, but the latest iPhones, I think since 14, and then some Samsungs and others now have satellite comms, like the Spot. If you do endurance events and go out into the middle of nowhere, there are a few suppliers of like the Spot GPS device that lets you communicate via satellite. Garmin have a couple of them, and you can now, the Garmins and whatever's, I think, are a little bit more advanced. I think because obviously they recognize if you fall off of your bike, you just need to be able to send a text. Whereas I think the Apple one, you have to, I don't know, hold it up into the air and whilst on one leg, and which is quite hard to do if you've fallen off of your bike and broken your arm or your leg. But it's still better than nothing. And of course, one of the things that we haven't got onto yet is the fact that the PSTN is being ripped out. And so for decades now, the getting the fiber to the middle of nowhere hasn't happened for 2 decades. We're now ripping out all of the copper, and everything's going to be wireless. And at least in the UK, the government has said I don't know if you can remember, Carl, which year, but
I thought it was meant to be 2025, but they delayed it so many times.
Yeah,
I've lost track a little bit. But I think it's going to be. I think it was 2025, but it may well have slipped out a few years to 2029. I don't know. But it is in real time.
You are supposed to
be service, isn't it? Yeah.
You are supposed to be able to get a service anywhere in the UK in terms of where there's population, and be able to make an emergency call anywhere in the UK. Was it an emergency text or an emergency anywhere in the British Islands? Which is the only way I can see that happening is really with the kind of vehicles, networks on wheels that we're doing, because obviously you're not going to put a load of infrastructure in the Outer Hebrides. However, if there is an event that requires people to go there, the moment those people know that they need to use a Spot or a Garmin satellite-based messenger to be able to track them and see if they come off the bike. But in theory, that should be covered by the public infrastructure, which the only way they're going to do it is with. I'll volunteer to drive an e-cargo bike up a mountain. I'll obviously regret that after saying, you said you could lift it up if we take the batteries out. How many times have we taken all the batteries out? It's the 5th time. But it should be quite interesting anyway. So I suppose there was some kind of event, wasn't there, recently in our industry? I don't know, something about Barcelona.
MWC in Barcelona, yeah.
It's called? I can't remember now. It's a little known thing. But is there anything interesting that's come out of that? Or have we closed our ears to them?
Well, no, I mean, I didn't go, but I understand that eSIMs were one of the flavours of the day, which they have been for several years now, haven't they? Particularly aiming at the traveller market. So it uses a second SIM. Most phones now, certainly the modern phones, developed in the last 2 or 3 years, can all accept an eSIM, be they Android or iPhone. Yes. So I think there's a lot, and if you look at some of the early adopters and the big operators in there, they're certainly starting to sell eSIMs for travellers in their thousands, if not tens of thousands.
Millions.
Or millions, again, big, yes, yeah.
What we've not got to forget is that there are billions of these devices out there, and the whole market has now shifted from having a second phone to being able to put it. There are 10 SIM slots on, must be over a billion devices. I know I did read some stats that there are over a billion, and something like about 3 billion projected in the next few years.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And a lot of people, I did read some things that said, the eSIM was a big topic, and one of them, there was too many people going after this market, and it's like, well, not really. I mean, if you look at, there's a few people in this space, but I think the biggest investment I've heard about is one of the providers I think they had a 60 million round, which, you know, it's quite a big round by VC standards, but it's not the billions that go into like an Uber to take over and disrupt a market. And the amounts of SIMs that I've seen going out there, they're growing and they're in the millions and they're quite big, but they're not the billions yet. But it has got massive potential to change the market. Where
I genuinely think the big change since, I guess, for this MWC over previous, and it's not mainstream yet, is in the IoT market. I guess the introduction of SGB 32 standards in May last year from GSMA. There's a lot of testing needs to go on and to make it mainstream, and we're clearly involved with that, of helping eSIM providers integrate what we've got with what they've got, and test to make this simple. But it allows devices to be able to connect locally if they move around, asset tracking, etc. You know, with the new standards, and it's simplified from an IoT perspective what was an averagely attractive product historically, and I think that's the big takeaway for me. And over the next year, I would see that get implemented quite heavily by a lot of people.
Yes, well, I mean, we've been testing as much as we can, as it's been delayed, unfortunately, for a bit. But yes, it is going to change. At the moment, I think there is clearly a consumer and a business
device side
IoT divide, except for the few who have the sort of hybrid solutions. But yeah, it is going to, and I think that, well, I think that was the hint. Now, you're going to have a situation where you have a SIM, or you can have a bunch of SIMs that you control from a single app or multiple apps. And it is going to be very interesting in terms of how many SIMs are going to have devices and how many SIMs are going to be in devices. I don't think anyone sort of clocked at the moment that it's not a race for the second SIM slot. It's a race for the 10 to 15 second SIM slots. Within that SIM slot, and obviously only one will be active at the time, and it gets rid of one of those the horrible words that in the sort of 20 years that we've all been doing MVNOs. Makes us sound old, but cannibalization was one of the words that happened a lot. But at the moment, there is no cannibalization, because you keep your existing, even if you go and you move house, which was traditionally a source of churn, and you don't have great coverage there, if you've got a second SIM that does give you coverage on other networks, there isn't that, let's call it SIM anxiety. We should have a new phrase. Let's get rid of range anxiety and call it coverage anxiety. That's going to be the new thing as we rip up the PSTN and we get more and more SIMs in more devices. It's coverage anxiety, and it's solving that. So yeah, SGP 32 is going to be great. We are part of that with, and I'm looking forward to. I really am looking forward to that, and obviously what's going to be changing as well is, LPAE is going to be an interesting development. People being able to update. So if you do have a situation now where, I mean, the things that you see now, for example, are cease and desists. If someone's trying to use a SIM that they shouldn't be using in a country, and they'll just be able to not cease and desist, the order will be, you need to replace these with a national SIM, or if you need to move from one country to another in an ever more international society, that is a good thing, right? But yeah, so eSIM is, we only touched the surface, really, haven't we?
Yes, that's a lot more for another day with eSIM.
Indeed, it is.
It is. I think that's an interesting start for Wireless Wednesdays. Haven't noticed, I don't know if anyone's guessed how you can spot that the image used on LinkedIn was actually a used an AI generated image, but 5 chimneys on the Battersea Power Station. If anyone comes to visit us in the Battersea Power Station, they'll see there's only 4, and there's only smoke on one of them, not on all 4 of them. But yeah, I think we'll be using an AI generated image for now, and then we'll put there'll be ones with our private 5G Land Rover and private 5G e-cargo bikes going around, and you have to spot whether we've done that via AI or in reality, and it shouldn't be that hard. But that'll be another topic, I suppose, for another time. We can't do this without encroaching on AI. But we're just getting to grips with this. So I think normally in the previous ones we're going to try and do shout outs and stuff, but we didn't want to press too many buttons this time. But yeah, I don't think there are any comments. We've run out of time, but in the next ones we'll be getting more people to participate and doing comments, etc. And but I think that's it for now.
Good.
Anyone for anything else?
No, just from the tracking perspective, I think just to cover off one big area that we haven't really mentioned is animal tracking. Dogs and things like that. Dogs and and animals.
Partners.
Yeah, partners.
I've been tracking. No, it is huge, and for all sorts of good reasons, which we can do on another series. Everything from being able to see how carbon neutral you are, so you can sort of be able to calculate how much you've saved by using an e-bike or by walking rather than using a silly car, all the way to actually being able to monitor how much electricity is going to be needed. So we can see when you come back into your house and when you want to put the lights on. Because at the moment we still plan the national grid based on 9 to 5 and people putting the kettle on during Coronation Street. Not quite. But the peaks and troughs of the national grid are going to become more important. There's all these. It is a very important point, and we will discuss these in future ones. It's so exciting. This is the most exciting thing you can do on LinkedIn, really, I think.
On a Wednesday afternoon, of course.
Wednesday afternoon. I think we'll leave it there. Thanks all, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you in the next one.
See you in the next one.